Hello, friends. We are in a truly unique position. Even computer analysis does not immediately see that white can actually win here. Only after we manually make the first fantastically beautiful move does the computer begin to understand that white indeed has a winning plan. Try to solve this puzzle on your own. If you need some time, pause the video. If not, let's look at the correct solution together. So, what thoughts come to mind first, both for us and even for the computer? Of course, we might want to become active with the g-pawn. But what happens if we capture on f7? Black replies with a check, and the white king will never be able to escape from the perpetual checks that follow. And as soon as the white king steps aside, without its support, it becomes impossible to set up any mating net against the black king. Similarly, any queen move to b8, a8, or anywhere else leads to the black queen starting a checking sequence against the white king. Once again, there is either no escape from the checks, or in order to escape, the king has to run so far away that it becomes impossible to build a mating net. Among all the options suggested by the computer, the most interesting one is capturing gxh. Why? Because it hides several tricky traps. For example, if black naively captures the pawn, then after the sequence queen h3, queen g4, and queen g7, black is actually checkmated. But of course, after gxh, black is not obliged to capture the pawn on h7. They can simply make a calm move, king to h8. Now the black queen is ready to enter the game, either immediately with checks or a bit later. White can still set a very cunning trap, lying in wait, hoping that black will greedily capture the bishop, and then after king f7 and queen g7, deliver checkmate. But once again, black simply checks the king. The king must move. Yes, black's king is in check. But after the move king h7, it turns out that the white king has moved too far away, and without its participation, no mating net is possible. Let's return to the initial position and think, how can white actually win here? The win is only possible thanks to a fantastically beautiful idea involving a bishop retreat and a queen sacrifice. The bishop can retreat to c7, b6, or a5, but only the move bishop to c7 contains two key ideas. After the capture of the white queen, white plays pawn takes f7 with check, and the black king must move. On king f8, there is a simple mate in one. On king h8, there is a discovered check idea. We will analyze this idea in detail, but the key point is that when the bishop retreats to c7, black has no choice but to capture the white queen. It may seem that this is indeed a tricky move, but it can easily be refuted by the move knight to c7. However, that's not the case. After knight to c7, even though black defends their queen, white has the move pawn takes f7 with check and a fork. The black queen cannot capture this pawn because it's pinned. As a result, the queen is lost, and white wins easily. Let's return now to the main line. Black was forced to capture the white queen. Then white captures on f7, and to avoid immediate mate, the black king moves to h8. White places the bishop in an ambush. Now a beautiful checkmate is threatened no matter what black plays. If black tries to free their king and give it some breathing space, white responds with king to g6, check and mate. If black tries to give any check to the white king, the king will simply step to e7. There will be a check, black will have to block, and then it will be mate. It seems that white is calmly winning here. Yes, of course, the move bishop to c7 was not obvious, but after bishop to e5 everything looks clear and decisive. Yet, the game is just beginning. Black has a brilliant defensive resource, queen to c5. This move simultaneously controls the pawn promotion square and sets up a very dangerous trap. If the white king moves anywhere, for example king to e6 with check, black sacrifices the queen for the bishop, then brings the king closer to the pawn and steps in front of it. The pawn cannot advance anymore, and with two passed pawns and a knight, black wins easily. Therefore, after queen to c5, white must eliminate the threat to the bishop. To do that, the bishop must retreat while maintaining the battery, either to b2 or a1. Without precise calculation, it's not immediately clear where the bishop should go. Intuitively, in a normal chess game, we often follow the principle, the farther from the opponent's pieces, the safer. So let's calculate bishop to a1. It seems that after retreating the bishop, if black's queen tries to continue the hunt, things end badly for black. The white king steps to e6, delivering a check with the bishop. Black is forced to capture the bishop, but then the white pawn promotes to a queen and delivers mate. It seems like bishop to a1 should finish the game, but even here, things are not that simple. Black has a beautiful defensive move, knight to c7. It turns out that even though white's battery is deadly, the king has no useful moves. The only thing white can rely on in this position is zugzwang, a situation where black eventually runs out of good moves. As we've already seen, moving the queen away is bad. Once the queen moves, the white king will have the move king to f5 or king to g5. But the knight also has no good moves. No matter where the knight goes, the white king will be able to step to e6. And moving the pawn is also bad. If the pawn goes to h6 or h5, the white king will have the move king to g6. So what can black do here? All they can do is keep pushing the pawn, while we simply shuffle our pieces back and forth. Bishop to b2, then a4, then back to a1, then a3, and, oh horror, we suddenly run out of moves ourselves. Instead of putting black in zugzwang, we are now the ones in zugzwang. Disaster. But we mentally rewind the position to the moment when we were deciding how to deal with the threat of queen to e5. We remember that we had two options, bishop to a1 and bishop to b2. When we're playing for zugzwang, we must, of course, calculate both of these possibilities. So now let's examine what happens after bishop to b2. Once again, black's only defensive resource against king to e6 and mate is knight to c7. It seems like we might end up in zugzwang, shuffling back and forth, while black only has pawn moves on the a file. But here's the key, after the move a3, we have bishop to a1, after a2, we have bishop to b2. Once black's pawn has completed its journey down the board, they will have no more moves left that can save them from mate. If black plays knight to b5, we step with the king to e6. Check to the black king. Yes, black can try to block even with check, but we simply capture the knight, promote the pawn to a queen, and deliver checkmate. If the h-pawn moves to h5, then mate follows quickly after king to g6. Yes, there may be some desperate interpositions, but they don't change the outcome. And finally, any queen move, whether queen to d6 or anywhere else, frees the f5 or g5 squares for the white king. Check. The queen blocks. The bishop captures on f6 and delivers a beautiful checkmate. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. It seems hopeless, but it's checkmate in a few moves. We are playing as white, and we want to win, but there's a problem. Our white queen is completely pinned and can't move at all. Try to find the correct solution on your own. Pause the video for a moment to think. Alright, now that you've resumed the video, I'll show you the correct solution and the logical way to figure it out. To win in this position, white needs to create a team of two pieces to checkmate the unfortunate black king. That's why any moves that reduce the number of active pieces, for example, queen to h1, are not even worth considering, because they can't lead to victory. It's clear that we need to start attacking the black king by giving checks, but not just any checks. For our team of pieces to work together, both the rook and the queen need to be able to move. So our first priority is to unpin the white queen. To do this, we must place our rook on the diagonal where the pin occurs, and we must do it with check. The first move is rook to d6. This is just a check for now, not the actual unpinning yet. But the next rook check is different. It's a special check that frees the queen, breaking the deadly pin. Now the queen is no longer tied to the king, and black has a choice. They can move the king to d1, which immediately allows queen to c2 checkmate, or move the king to b1, where queen to c2 will give check. This position is already much more pleasant than the original one. At least our queen can move now. But there's still a problem. The rook is currently immobile. Simple queen checks probably won't lead anywhere. So, just as we reasoned on the first move, to win we need both white pieces to become fully active. That means we must now increase the mobility of our rook. What does that mean? It means we need to unpin the rook along the diagonal as well. And to do that, we need to place another piece between the king and the rook. And of course, the only piece that can do this is the white queen. The queen must now give purposeful checks, not random ones, checks that bring it closer to the b7 square. First, we give a check on a4. Then, instead of a meaningless check on b4, we play a more purposeful check on b5. Why? Because the queen is moving step by step like a staircase toward b7. It doesn't actually matter whether the black king goes to a3, a2, or a1, it's doomed to wander along the a and b files, and it has no escape. If the king goes to a1, then queen to a6 follows. If the king goes to b2, then queen to b7 follows. And with that, we've accomplished the task of freeing our rook from the pin. From here, no matter what the black king does, we simply deliver checkmate with our newly freed rook. I hope you enjoyed this puzzle. Do you have a talent for chess? Just one puzzle. This exact puzzle was once solved by legendary grandmasters such as Karpov, Kasparov, Kramnik, and many others. By watching this video until the end, you'll also find out what your current chess level is. At first glance, the puzzle looks strange. There are no kings, and apart from pawns and one queen, there are no other pieces. What can possibly happen here? In fact, it's very simple. Back in the USSR, puzzles like this were used to test players' thinking skills, how they react to stressful and unusual situations, how quickly they make decisions, how they adapt, and so on. Based on these puzzles, coaches selected the most promising talents who later became top players. Kramnik, Kasparov, and Karpov all went through similar tests and solved puzzles like this before being admitted into elite chess schools. So this puzzle has truly stood the test of time. Now, let's put it to the test with you. In this position, it's white to move, and your task is to make sure the white queen captures all of black's pawns. It's possible that a pawn might promote during the process, but if your queen captures it afterward, it still counts. White starts and must win. To keep things fair, pause the video and try to solve it on your own. Write your solution in the comments, then resume watching. If you've already done that, let's go through the correct solution and common mistakes together. First, we evaluate the position. Not capturing a pawn right away is usually a bad idea because there are 4 pawns, and the fewer there are, the easier it becomes to stop them. The queen is powerful, but even a queen can struggle to stop multiple passed pawns alone. So we need to decide carefully which pawn to capture first. For example, if we move the queen here, the pawn advances. How do we stop this one, or the neighboring one, or the next? If we start capturing, another pawn promotes. If we don't capture and try to block instead, the pawns can advance together, and one of them will inevitably queen. So naturally, we must capture at least one of black's pawns immediately. Let's examine the move qb3. At first, it looks decent, but black has the strong reply c2, threatening to promote on c1, a square the queen doesn't control, making promotion easier. What can white do here? For example, white can capture the pawn on a3, both capturing and defending simultaneously. But then comes d2, and one of the pawns will promote. We fail to stop them. Let's rewind a bit. What if we don't capture the pawn on a3 but instead try to stop the c-pawn with qc4? That move blocks the pawn's path. Well then, the queen can't cover everything at once, and black will simply push the a2 pawn. If the queen captures the pawn on a2, the c1 pawn will promote. And if the queen doesn't capture but stays on, say, qc3, she's covering both pawns at once, but then the third pawn advances, and the queen can't keep up. If she captures one pawn, the other promotes. For example, if she captures here, the other pawn advances, and vice versa. So capturing the pawn on b3 immediately is a mistake because the queen gets stretched too thin and can't stop all the pawns in time. Let's try qd3 instead. After qd3, black can still push c2, and now white has 2 correct replies, qc3 or qd2. Let's examine qc3 first. If black tries b2, white simply captures on c2, and whichever pawn advances next, the queen will take it. If black plays a2, the queen steps in between the pawns, and now neither pawn can promote. If one tries to move, white will capture it. On qd2, the same logic applies. If black pushes b2, white immediately captures the c2 pawn, and whichever pawn advances next, white will stop it. If black pushes a2 right away, then qc1 solves everything. Whichever pawn moves, the queen captures it. So both qc3 and qd2 are correct solutions. If you found either one, that's great, you solved the puzzle correctly. However, we've only calculated one black response so far, the c2 push. In puzzles like this, you must consider all possible pawn moves, not just one. Since black can advance a2, b2, or c2, we need to analyze at least 3 variations. If black starts with a2, it's simple, we capture on c3, and the queen simultaneously controls both remaining pawns. Neither will be able to promote because the queen will capture whichever tries. If black starts with b2, we place the queen on b1, and again, neither pawn can successfully promote. If c2 pushes next, we capture it. If a2 pushes, we capture b2, and the queen stays close enough to stop the remaining pawn. By calculating these 3 main variations, we found the correct move. Each line is only 2 or 3 moves deep, and it's best to calculate them mentally rather than physically moving the pieces. But if you're a beginner and had to move the pieces to visualize, that's absolutely fine. That's part of the learning process. Lost position. White pulls off a stunning chess comeback. We're going to look at a brilliant study by Genrik Kasparian. We're playing with the white pieces. White pawns are moving upward, black pawns downward. White wants to win, although at first glance, it seems absolutely impossible. White has only 2 rooks, while black has a queen, a bishop, and strong central pawns. Nothing seems to indicate danger for black, except for one thing, their king's slightly vulnerable position. And such a king is usually a good target for a mating attack. Try to find the solution on your own first. I recommend pausing the video and calculating how white might try to win with the move. Once you've thought about it, let's go through the correct solution, and more importantly, the thought process that can lead us there. Step 1. Check the most obvious moves. The first step in any calculation is to check our most natural candidate moves. Here, all of white's possibilities are somehow connected to the exposed position of the black king. So the most natural move is, of course, a b6 check. But after kxb1, we discover that white cannot create any new threats. For example, if the rook goes to h5 to threaten mate, black has the resource d4+, which completely destroys white's mating net. The white king has to move aside, and the mating attack collapses. This is why the first stage of thinking is so important. It helps us identify which defensive ideas we need to prevent. In this case, the key defensive move to stop is d4. We need to make a move that deprives black of time or the possibility to play d4. Step 2. Testing other candidate moves. White could try to create a dangerous mate threat with kc2, threatening rook sa2 next. Unfortunately, after kc2, black has qe8+, and once again the entire mating setup collapses. There's no win here either. So, we've learned that we need a move that simultaneously neutralizes both d4 and qe8+. Step 3. Considering sacrifices. One idea stands out, a rook sacrifice for the bishop. Indeed, if the black queen captures the rook, remember, d4 no longer works, qe8+ no longer works either, because the remaining white rook can simply capture the black queen. If the queen takes the rook, then rh5 follows, creating a mating threat. And in this position, it turns out that black has no defense. There's simply no escape for the black king. There is absolutely no defense against the move rh1, not even the slightest check or block. Of course, we're not counting desperate interpositions like qh2, which don't change the position at all. But remember, chess is not checkers. If white sacrifices the rook on rb8, black can simply respond with qf7. Formally, white then has 2 rooks against a queen, which isn't bad. In fact, mathematically, 2 rooks are slightly stronger than a queen. However, the white king is completely exposed, and that changes everything. We could calculate some lines here, for example, qf2+, or even starting with qf3+ followed by qf2, and we would see that black is actually closer to winning than white. Or we don't even need to calculate. It's clear that if white doesn't have a forced mate, and the king is exposed while the black queen can check freely, then white has no realistic winning chances here. Just to be thorough, let me show you a precise line that demonstrates how black can even play for a win. After kc4 qb3 plus e3, if white tries to stop the pawn with a rook along the 8th rank, black plays qc3+. The king blocks its own rook, and the pawn simply queens. And if white tries to stop the pawn with the other rook, there's a nice tactical idea, a queen sacrifice, and there's no way to prevent the second black pawn from queening. So, we've now gone through several stages of reasoning. We understood that we must prevent d4. We must also prevent qc8. And the analysis of the last line with the rook sacrifice on b8 shows us that we also need to prevent qf7. Therefore, our ideal move should prevent all of these black ideas simultaneously. How can we do that? Only by creating a powerful threat and, if possible, restricting the black queen's mobility. We've already seen that attacking the king or attacking along the 8th rank doesn't help. The only thing left is to attack along the g-file. Let's calculate that. If black plays any of the previously effective moves, like d4, then either the queen is lost or there's mate on g1. So naturally, black's queen captures the rook on g5. And now the mating ideas we examined earlier, like a b6 check or especially kc2, come back into play. Remember, Previously, after ab6 check kxb1, nothing worked. But now, by following the principle that the best move is the one that prevents the opponent's strong reply, the move kc2 leaves black's queen with no checks at all, and ab6 becomes a real threat. The rest of the play is much simpler than everything we've seen so far. Here, black of course tries to avoid the opening of the A file, while white simply insists on their plan. And indeed, as soon as black either captures or allows white to capture, mate becomes inevitable. So black retreats and shuffles as best as they can, and white steadily advances. Then we reach what is probably the penultimate critical moment of this endgame. After the move bd6, we must decide where to place the rook to create the threat of promoting the pawn to a queen. If we move the rook to a random square, say rc8, it turns out that after ba3, not only does the black pawn queen without check, but black also creates the very dangerous mate threats qc1 and qb2. Suddenly, the black queen and bishop work together, and it's black who's delivering mate. So instead of retreating the rook randomly, we need to place it as actively as possible, so that it both supports the pawn and creates threats against the black king. After rh8, black plays ba3, again creating a terrifying mating threat. We respond using our tried and true principle. Our best move is the one that prevents the opponent's strongest idea. We stop qc1, and after ca2, white finally promotes to a queen. Why do we promote here? Firstly, it's much easier to give mate with a queen and a rook. Secondly, we now have a very concrete threat, rook sa1, after which the king recaptures and qa3 is checkmate. If black defends in a straightforward way, for example by reinforcing their bishop, then qa4 threatens mate. And to avoid this, black will have to give up the queen, after which it's clear white will win. Why? Because the b-pawn can be captured by the rook on b1 if necessary, while the queen cleans up the rest of the black pawns. However, the author's solution by Genrik Kasparian is much more elegant. He suggests for black the move qe5. What does this move do? If white plays rook sa1, black can now recapture with the queen instead of the king. But then another beautiful checkmate appears, qd5 #. And so, black has absolutely no way to escape in this position. I hope you enjoyed the beauty of this study and the analysis was interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. 95% of players fail here, will you? At first glance, you might say, what's so difficult here? White is a pawn up, and in a pawn endgame they should win easily. But if you try to solve this study on your own, you'll quickly see that things are not that simple. That's why I suggest pausing the video now if you want to find the solution yourself. If not, let's go through the thinking process and the correct solution together. Step 1, the most obvious idea. The first stage of our thinking process is simple. We look for the most natural solution in our head before making any moves on the board. The most obvious idea is, of course, to bring the white king closer, hoping to help exchange pawns on g4 and win the endgame. But here we immediately notice that this exchange doesn't actually happen. If we push g4, we simply lose the pawn, and black's pawn will queen easily. That's our first failed attempt. Step 2, neutralizing the opponent's strongest move. The second stage is to recall a fundamental principle. Your best move is usually the one that either prevents or makes the opponent's strongest move ineffective. In the previous line, black's strongest move was h2, moving closer to white's pawns. So how can we prevent the move kh2? In this case, we can't. But how can we make it unprofitable for black? One idea is to create a threat with g4, forcing a reaction. Unfortunately, if we do that immediately, black simply captures, and again their pawn queens with check, leaving white lost. The other method is to put black in zugzwang, making their strong move kh2 actually bad. To achieve this, white must move the king not to f2, but to e1 or e2. At this stage, we just select candidate moves that would make black's kh2 less effective. We'll check them properly in the next step. Intuitively, it seems best to move the king towards the center, closer to our pawns. But this allows black to play kg2, and then if we push g4, it won't lead to anything. Black's king will support their pawn. However, if black plays kh2, they actually step into zugzwang. After kh3 and kf3, black's king is forced to step back, and white can exchange on g4 and win easily. One pawn is sacrificed, and the other queens without trouble. Testing the move q2. Let's see what happens if we play q2, and black replies with kg2. In this case, bringing the king alone won't help. white will likely lose the race. So white has to rely on pawn play, specifically the g4 breakthrough idea. With the breakthrough we clear a path for our f-pawn, and we have the possibility to sacrifice one pawn and march the other to promotion. Let's see what happens. Consider first sacrificing the h6 pawn at the start. Pattern-thinking players tend to give up the flank pawn first. Then black captures the pawn, but on the move f6 black calmly sidesteps with their king. Again, the promotions happen simultaneously and the position on the board is a drawn one, clearly not a win. It might seem that giving up the f-pawn instead would be a little better. Let's check that. So after f6 the pawn is taken. h6, black plays f5. h7, black plays f4, and white, yes, white really promotes first, but there's one problem. Black's pawn comes with check to f3 and then calmly proceeds to f2. Connected passed pawns that reach the penultimate rank can in practice be even stronger than a queen. Here, for example, white has a single move that does not lose, qa8. After kg1 it turns out that on the check black simply interposes and promotes to a queen. Trying to blockade the pawn, blockade being an effective method for a queen to fight a passed pawn, doesn't help here. Black has two passed pawns and both will reach promotion squares. For instance, after ko2 the black king simply sidesteps to h1. It's important to understand, not to h2. Not to h2, because the opponent would capture the pawn via a blockade. Reminder, blockading a passed pawn is a very effective method of queen versus pawn play. But after kh1 there is no blockade. If the queen captures, black promotes and again it is a dead draw. Any checks will not cause problems for black. And indeed the continuation is just blockade/repetition and so on. We return to the starting position. After the second stage we checked the lines deeply and saw that the attempt to force black into zugzwang with ko2 was unsuccessful. We could be disappointed, or we can recall the simple truth. Our best move is the one that prevents the opponent's strongest reply. The difference here is that if in the first stage we immediately saw the opponent's strongest response on the first move, now we must run through the variation again, understand exactly why our line fails, and try to fix that on the very first move. Let's run once more through the wrong variation. f6, and here the key moment that allows black to save the game is the move f3 with check. Now let's combine the two ideas. On the very first move, we'll try to make a move that makes kh2 disadvantageous for black, and at the same time, ensures that after the breakthrough moves g4, f5, and f6, the black pawn cannot check our king too early. So we arrive at the conclusion, ko1. In fact, either this move wins, or the position is completely hopeless. Let's check it carefully for the sake of thoroughness. After kg2 g4 fx gf5 g3, everything is the same as before. The idea of distracting with the h6 pawn doesn't work. Black simply captures it and steps aside with the king. As we discussed earlier, the pawns promote simultaneously, and here black even queens with check. This gives black some practical winning chances, even though objectively it's still a draw. But now the move f6 allows white to win. Why? Because in the pawn race, white still queens first, but the black f3 push no longer comes with check. That means black doesn't have time to advance their connected passed pawns to the penultimate rank. Remember, the most effective method for a queen to fight pawns is blockade. After qa8, white inevitably captures the pawn on f3. And with only a knight pawn left, white should win with correct play. Let me emphasize once more, the best way to fight passed pawns with a queen is blockade. After kh1 qh4, there's only one subtlety left: avoid accidentally stalemating the black king. Since the pawn can't move and the king has no legal moves, we must give the black king a square. For example, by moving kd1 or kd2, giving the king one square, we ensure that checkmate is unavoidable. I hope you enjoyed and found this study interesting. 99% of beginners miss this brilliant knight move. Can you find the mate? The third world chess champion, José Raúl Capablanca, once said that the combination of a queen and a knight is the most dangerous force on the chessboard. Today, we're going to see exactly why that's true. Take a look at this beautiful position. Black has an overwhelming material advantage, an extra rook and no less than 5 extra pawns. And yet, white is about to deliver checkmate. Think about how this could be possible. If you need more time, pause the video. If not, let's analyze it together. In this position, white is preparing to attack the black king with a discovered check. The key is that only one knight move leads to checkmate, all the others fail. For example, the most natural move is nxf1+. The knight can't be captured because that would expose the black king to a direct check from the queen. If the king moves, white has a simple mate. It looks promising, but black has a simple defensive resource, e3. White is then forced to capture the pawn with the queen, and the result is stalemate. Black has no legal moves, and their king is not in check. If white tries to maintain the discovered check idea by capturing on e3 with the knight, black has a brilliant counterattack. They sacrifice the queen with qe3+, forcing the white king to g2, and then the rook delivers a check, clearing the way for the passed pawns. The king captures, black promotes to a queen, and suddenly we have a queen endgame where black is 2 pawns up. There's no chance of a white win from there. If we continue to test other knight moves such as nc2, nd1, or ing4, the same defensive idea e3 appears every time, neutralizing white's attack. So should the knight not move at all? Actually, it should, but it must jump specifically to d5. Why? Because after black plays e3, white has a completely different, unexpected idea. Capturing on e3 with the queen still doesn't work, because after the queen trade the bishop on f8 becomes active, escaping to a square like a8, and white has no mating net. Capturing on e3 with the knight is even worse, because black can give a check with qg3+, promote their pawn to a second queen, win the knight, and easily checkmate. So what should white do? Surprisingly, despite black's overwhelming material advantage, the winning idea is to offer a queen trade. Why is this the winning idea? If black captures the queen, white recaptures on f4, and black is in zugzwang. It's not stalemate, black still has a bishop move available, but after the bishop moves, n2 delivers checkmate. You might say that black isn't forced to capture the queen here, and you'd be absolutely right. But what other options do they have? If black captures the knight on d5, white plays qe3+, and after kg2, qf2 finishes the game. However, black has one resource that can make white's task slightly trickier, the move bg2. The queen on g5 is now under attack, and black sets a cunning trap. If white captures the bishop, the position is stalemate, none of the black pieces or pawns have legal moves, and the king is not in check. So what should white do? There's a brilliant continuation, nc3, threatening the n2. Now black is lost no matter what they try. If they defend the pawn with the bishop to stop mate, white simply captures the queen, and checkmate follows anyway. If black takes the queen, white delivers n2. And if black's queen tries to cover the e2 square to block the knight's mate, then the white queen delivers mate herself. This beautiful study perfectly demonstrates the power of the queen and knight working together. Thanks for watching.